Flora, Ulysses by... Where were we? Oh, we just got to the dad's apartment, and at the dad's apartment, we met the neighbor who is a doctor of philosophy, not a medical doctor. And so, she is helping to figure out if he has a concussion. All right, so let's look. Chapter 38. Unremitting darkness. You, said Dr. Meacham to Flora, you have a seat in the sofa and listen to the Mozart. I will go make us some sandwiches. What about my father, said Flora. Shouldn't I tell him where I am? Mr. George Buckman knows where you are, said Dr. Meacham. He knows that you are safe. So, good. All is good. You will sit on this horse chair sofa, please. Girls and boys, you need to tell your parents where you are. You don't trust a stranger, even if they are a neighbor. You need to tell your parents. I think what she's doing right now is unsafe. Safeless, without safety. Dr. Meacham went into the kitchen, and Flora turned and looked at the couch. It was a huge couch. Huge. She dutifully sat down on it and then slowly, very slowly slid off. Oh, sorry, I slid off the couch. Wow, she said. She climbed back up on the couch and concentrated on staying put. She sat with her hands on either side of her and her legs straight out in front of her. She felt like an oversized doll. She also felt very, very tired and a bit confused. Maybe I'm in shock, she thought. Terrible things can happen to you had done an issue listing the symptoms of shock, but Laura couldn't remember what they were. Maybe she was in shock. Was one of the symptoms of shock that you couldn't remember? The symptoms of shock? She looked over at Ulysses. He was still sitting on the dining room table, and he looked confused too. She waved at him. He nodded back. And then she noticed there was a picture hanging on the wall opposite the couch. It was a painting of what looked like nothing but darkness. Unremitting darkness. Unremitting darkness was a phrase that occurred often in the criminal element. But why would someone paint a picture of unremitting darkness? Flora slid off the couch and walked over to the painting and stared at it more closely. In the middle of all the darkness, there was a tiny, tiny boat. It was floating on a black sea. Flora put her face right up against the painting. Something was wrapped around the boat. Some sort of tentacle. Shadow. For the love of Pete, the tiny boat in the dark sea was getting eaten by a giant squid. Flora's heart protested with a small thud of fear. Holy bagumba, she whispered. From the kitchen, there came a sound of clinking silverware and crashing plates, and opera music ended. Ulysses, Flora said. She looked behind her and saw the squirrel sitting on the floor, sniffing his tail. Are you picturing that? Mm-hmm. Sniffing his tail. You know, like dogs and cats kind of do that. Yes. Ooh. Ooh. She looked behind her and saw the squirrel sitting on the floor, sniffing his tail. Come here, she said to him. He walked over to her, and she picked him up and put him on her shoulder. Look, she said. My question is, why does somebody have such a kind of like scary-ish picture on their wall of their living room? Shouldn't the wall have happy pictures on it?
I have a happy picture.
He stared at the painting. This boat is getting eaten by a giant squid. He nodded. It's a tragedy, said Flora. There are people on board that boat. Look, you can see them. They are ant-sized, but they're people. Ulysses squinted. He nodded. They're all going to die, explained Flora. Every last one of them. As a superhero, you should be outraged. You should want to save them. And Candisto would save them. Ah, said Dr. Beecham, coming up behind them. You are studying my poor, lonely giant squid. That is the perception. That's the squid's perception. So Flora's perception, what she thinks of the squid is, he is eating. But Dr. Beecham is saying the squid is lonely. No one, I did not even think of that, how lonely the squid could be feeling right now. Lonely, said Flora. The giant squid is the loneliest of all of God's creatures. He can sometimes go for the whole of his life without seeing another of his kind. For some reason, Dr. Meacham's word conjured up the face of William Spliver. White-haired, dark-eyed, Flora's heart squinced up. Go away, William Spliver, she thought. The squid is a villain, said Flora out loud. He needs to be vanquished. He's eating a boat, and he's going to eat all the people in the boat. Yes. Well, loneliness makes us do terrible things. That's pretty deep. Loneliness makes us do terrible things. He's eating a boat, and he's going to eat all the people. And that is why the picture is there. Remind me of this. Also, because the other Dr. Meacham painted it when he was young and joyful. So this is Flora with Ulysses looking at the picture over the fireplace. Good grief, thought Flora. What did he paint when he was old and depressed, if this is what he is painting when he was young and joyful? Now you will sit on the horse chair sofa, please, said Dr. Meacham, and I will bring the jelly sandwiches. I would never feed a child jelly sandwiches in the living room.
I would.
You know where that jelly's going to get?
All over the couch.
All over the couch. That's just me. That's just what I was thinking. Flora sat down on the couch. Ulysses was still on her shoulder. She put her hand and touched him. He was warm. He was a small engine of warmness. The giant squid was the loneliest creatures in all of existence, said Flora out loud. And then, to keep things grounded and in perspective, she muttered, seal blubber. And then she whispered, do not hope. Instead, observe. She kept her hand on the squirrel. Oh boy. Chapter 39, the tears roll off. Who's got tears? Who's going to have tears? Flora? You think Flora's going to be crying? She does not have hope. She tries not to have hope. Let's look. Dr. Meacham came out of the kitchen holding a pink plate with small sandwiches on it. She sat down next to Flora. You are enjoying the horsehair sofa, she said to Flora. I guess, Flora said. She wasn't exactly sure how someone enjoyed a horsehair sofa. You will eat jelly sandwiches, said Dr. Meacham. She extended the plate to Flora. Ulysses leaped off Flora's shoulders and onto her lap and sniffed the plate. Our patient is hungry, said Dr. Meacham. He never had breakfast, said Flora. She took 2 sandwiches and handed one to Ulysses. This sofa, said Dr. Meacham, is the sofa of my great-grandmother. She was born on the sofa. I'm just going to pretend I didn't read that. In Blundermeakin. She lived a whole of her life there in that town, and she is buried there in a dark wood. But that is a different story. Her story is making me uncomfortable. What I meant to say is that when I was a girl in Blundermeakin, I sat on the sofa and spoke with my grandmother about inconsequential things, well into the gloom of the evening. That is what a girl in Blundermeakin did those days. She was expected to speak of inconsequential things as the gloom of the evening descended. So inconsequential is kind of a big word, and it just means like non-important. unimportant things like, hey, how's the weather? Have you read any good books lately? Have you seen any good movies? Inconsequential. Also, she must knit. Always the gloom was descended in Blundermeeken. Always, always one was knitting outfits for the little trolls. Trolls? Trolls. How you doing over there? What little trolls, said Flora. And where's Blundermeeken? Never mind about the trolls for now. I meant to say that life was very gloomy then. And one is always knitting. It sounds lousy, said Flora. It was exactly lousy, said Dr. Meakin. And she smiled. Her dentures were very bright. And there was the smear of grape jelly on one of her fake incisors. Incisors, a tooth.
Ew. Ew.
So she had jelly in her teeth. But she didn't know it because they were fake teeth. And unless she put her tongue on it, she wouldn't taste it. All right. Flora reached for another sandwich. Had terrible things can happen to you ever warned against eating jelly sandwiches in the house of a woman from Blunder Meakin? Your father is a lonely man, Dr. Meakin said. Also very sad. To leave you, this broke his heart. It did, said Flora. Yes, Dr. George Buckman has sat on this horse-chair sofa many times. He has talked of his sadness. He has wept. Wait, who has the tears? Her dad, not her. He has wept. This sofa has seen the tears of many people. In this sofa that is good, this is a sofa that is good for tears. They roll off, you see? The tears roll off. Her father has sat on this couch and wept in the gloom of the evening. Flora suddenly felt like she might cry. What is wrong with her? Seal blubber, she thought, and the words steadied her. She says seal blubber in order to not get herself into the high hopes of hoping high. Your father is very capacious of heart. Do you know what that means? Flora shook her head. It means the heart of George Buckman is very large. It is capable of containing much joy and much sorrow. Oh, said Flora. For some reason, she heard William Spliver's voice saying that the universe was a random place. Capacious heart. Random universe. Capacious, random heart, universe. Flora felt dizzy. So much is going on in her head. I'm a cynic, she announced, and for no particular reason, and in a too loud voice. Bah! Cynics, said Dr. Meacham. Cynics are people who are afraid to believe, and she waved her hand in front of her face as if she was brushing away a fly. Cynics are afraid to believe.
Why?
Because if they have hope, their heart might. And then if it doesn't happen the way it wants to, it might break. Cynics think that. I know we're not playing. Sit down. Cynics do not have hope. Do you believe in things, said Flora. Yes, yes, I believe. Have you heard of Pascual Wagner? No, said Flora. Pascual had it that since it could not be proven whether God existed, one might also believe that he did, because there was everything to gain by believing and nothing to lose. This is how it is for me. What do I lose if I choose to believe? Nothing. Take this squirrel, for instance, Ulysses. Do I believe he can type poetry? Sure, I do believe. There is much more beauty in the world if I believe such a thing. Can you pick that up? Thanks. Flora and Dr. Meacham looked at Ulysses. He was holding half of a sandwich with his front paw. There were blobs of great jelly in his whiskers. So I'm making a picture in my mind of what a squirrel eating a sandwich looks like with grape jelly in his whiskers, and I'm thinking
He's alive?
this is not even
Is he dead?
comprehensible. Do you know what a superhero is?
Yeah.
Sure, I know what a superhero is. Ulysses is a superhero, said Flora, but he hasn't really done anything heroic yet. Mostly he's just flown around. He lifted a vacuum cleaner over his head. He wrote some poetry. He hasn't saved anyone, though. And that's what superheroes are supposed to do. They're supposed to save people. So for some reason, Flora thinks he's a superhero. But he hasn't really done anything superheroish, except for holding the vacuum over his head.
And flying.
Who knows what he will do, said Dr. Meacham. Who knows whom he will save? So many miracles have not yet happened. Flora watched as one of the jelly blobs in Ulysses' whiskers trembled and fell in slow motion onto the horsehair couch. I knew it. I don't know if that's a really great and wonderful prediction, but I knew it. Because who feeds squirrels and children jelly sandwiches on a fancy couch? All things are possible. When I was a girl in Blundermeakin, the miraculous happened every day, or every other day, or every third day. Actually, sometimes it didn't happen at all, even on the third day. But still, we expected it. You see what I'm saying? Even when it didn't happen, we were expecting it. We knew the miraculous would come. There was a knock at the door. See? This will be your father, Mr. George Buckman. Flora stood and went to the door and opened it. It was her father, and he was smiling. Again. Still. Which seemed like a miracle. Hi, Pop, she said. You see? He smiles, said Dr. Meacham. Flora's father's smile got bigger. He took off the hat. He bowed. George Buckman, how do you do? He said. Flora couldn't help it. She smiled, too. She was still smiling when the noise that sounded like the end of the world echoed through the hallway of Blixen Arms. 1 minute her father was standing there with his hat in his hands, smiling, and the next minute, Mr. Claus, the cat, Mr. Claus, came out of nowhere and landed right on top of Mr. George Buckman's unprotected head. Dun, dun, dun. Yes. Dun, dun, dun.